Hello everyone, I am L to the W. I'm a disabled veteran and a YouTube vlogger. I vlog about everything cars, coffee, and life. Today we have my beautiful 2005 GTO, and I'm trying to diagnose a loud roaring noise that I have from the car. When you go down the road, it sounds like it has extremely loud tires or something like that, and I think I diagnosed it to this wheel bearing back here, which isn't like most cars. It is a pressed on bearing. There's a hub right here that goes all the way through that this whole assembly is going to slide out. So I have not seen any videos whatsoever on how to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and make one and we're going to learn together. So first step I'm going to try to do is get this half shaft out, and then what that'll do is free this up and I'll be able to spin this freely, and then that'll tell me for sure if I got a bad bearing, because I should feel some drag. So right there's about 6 8mm Allens, and you have the same on this side. So I got that. I'm gonna grab my air tool to speed this up and we're gonna go get this out. Okay, so here's a tip for you. That's going to want to spin, so what you need to do is jack the car up just high enough so the tire's clear. And what you do is like that, put a jack underneath the swing arm, and then when you need to rotate it, just lift that tire up enough, and then you can use that tire, because you have a lot more leverage to spin, because you really can't get to all of these bolts from underneath. So, and also found out you only need to undo the half shaft from the front, and those bolts are freaking tough. Those bolts are freaking tough. It's unreal how hard it is. They must have Loctite the crap out of them, but anyhow, we got this now. So what I'm gonna do is bungee cord this half shaft up and try to get a feel for what that bearing's doing. So this thing isn't exactly spinning freely, especially going forward. So what I'm going to do is take this brake off to make sure I have absolutely no drag. And what there is an 18mm here on the inside, and then a 15 right here. Why they did that, I don't know. Next up, I'm using a 19mm, taking these two bolts that hold the brake bracket on, because the bracket is actually rubbing. So it is. Seems to actually spin pretty good. Next step is to take that big bolt out. It is a 32mm. Luckily, I had this socket. I had a Chevy HHR that had the oil filter on top of the engine, so I've had this socket. I saw someone online post a picture on the GTO forums where they grinded down a socket. But luckily, this one fits, so if you need to do this job, this Craftsman regular socket actually fits that tight hole. As you can see, I have a gear puller set up on this. It's pushing in on the axle and it's pulling out on this hub piece, and hopefully that's going to work. We get this piece out of here. I really hope it's this bearing. Well, came off. Do not know how it's going back on. A little technical difficulty getting this hub out. The stuff I read online, it made it sound like it came out really easy. The guy said he just like pried it out like this, put a pry bar in here and just got it out. Another person said a couple hits with the hammer, so I tried putting a Phillips head screwdriver in here. Then I even tried using an extension, and it wouldn't budge. Now what I probably should have done, now I don't even know if this would have been helped, I should have put the nut on here, because what I did is I missed one time and I messed up the thread. So at that point I made the decision that I'm gonna have to buy a new spindle now at this point. So I had to go get this little hatchet here, and it was the only thing that had enough weight to punch that thing through. I don't know why was that stuck. I really don't. I have no idea why it was that seized in there, but it just would not budge. So now I'm gonna have to buy that piece on top of the bearing, but it is what it is. It was either that or drop the entire control arm out from underneath this thing, which means opening the brake system, which I can do. I can bleed. I just don't want to, but I really don't want to have to take out all these control arms, remove that spring and all that, and then bring this entire assembly to a machine shop, which that might be your option too. You might have to do that if you can't get that out. But anyhow, next step, there's a clip right here. We're going to go ahead and pull that so I can get the bearing out. Sometimes a little leverage doesn't hurt. There's your clip. It's what they call a seal puller. So I got that out pretty easy. Now I still just have this inner race I gotta get out. So now I have the answer to the bearing problem. This, the original piece, you can see has this tapered piece here for these bearings that go on. Okay. The new spindle does not have this piece. This is the new bearing. If you notice, it doesn't look anything like that, and if you match that up, it does take the entirety of this piece, which is why the manuals call for this race to be removed. So if you're not buying a new spindle, you will have to get a puller and remove that race. That being said, this piece here is the axle tube. The next step in, this piece here is the entire seat. This is the old inner bearing. You can see that piece there is a very small sealed bearing. So you had the sealed bearing, and then this cup here is where those other bearings were. Now it's just going to be one big sealed bearing. So the entirety of this piece here needs to be pulled out, and that's what we're going to do next. So let me explain to you what's going on here. This is a hollow metal cup, like right here. And then you have a plate that goes on top. Right here, a bolt goes through here to the other side, and then what you do is you have a fitting like this that goes on the other side of the bearing. It's going to push it through, and then as that race comes through, it's going to come into the cup. So you need, this is going to brace against the hub. The bolt is going to pull the bearing through, and the bearing is going to end up inside of here. So this is what the back side looks like. Here's the plate that's going to push the bearing through, and this is a very long bolt type thing, because as it goes through, you're going to lose this thing. So you want the bolt on the side that's going to push through. So let's go ahead and give it a try. Here it is, and that's the bushing. Here's the cup. See now? That's, oh wow, so look at that. The bearing is always been that thick. It's just that side is cupped for the bearings, and that side sealed. See, it was only halfway. Can you hear it? Sealed. So that's the secret. Alright. So now that leaves us this nice big clean can that we need to push the bearing back into. Yes, my bearing and my spindle are in the freezer, because if you don't understand, the metal contracts. It gets smaller when it gets cold. Metal also expands when it gets hot. So we're going to take the heat gun, we're going to heat this piece up, so hopefully it'll get a little bit bigger. The bearing's going to be a little bit smaller, and then hopefully it's just going to push right in. And the same thing with the bearing. Once the bearings get back up to room temperature, we'll heat them up just a little bit to try to get the center piece to expand, so the spindle will, basically the spindle will slide through the bearing, and then we can get this whole thing buttoned back up and hope for a quiet ride. Very carefully try to put a little bit of grease in here. Try to help. With any luck, it should slide in. Of course not. Alright, it worked. Here it is. It's in here. It's pushed all the way in. Feels really good. Now we just need to heat this up a little bit and then try to get the spindle to push through. Damn it. So what I ended up doing is using a board and a hammer to drive this through, and I really imagine that's not the best thing in the world for the bearings. I would really probably at this point recommend, probably the best thing to do is remove the entirety of the swing arm and just take this piece to a machine shop, let them extract and push the bearings on. But that, I'm not covering how to do that in this video, but if you still want to attempt it this way, this is how I got it. The people on the blogs that I read made this thing sound like it was so much easier than this. Anyhow, back here we got this, the piece the shaft goes onto. I was able to get enough threads. I took a very soft rubber hammer, this thing right here, and I was able to just tap each side a little bit to get it worked in enough to get the nut in there. And then this is where your air tools come in handy. I was able to use the air tool to get it all the way. Now the factory specs on that bolt's 220 foot-pounds. I don't even begin to have a torque wrench that goes that high. So what I end up doing is just putting the wheel on here to get it to hold it. And I'm just going to get my torque wrench is 3/4. It's huge. And it's going to give me enough leverage. And I'm just going to try to get as tight as I can. And then we'll go on and mount the brakes and the axle and we'll be done. What I'm going to do next is put this bracket on here. Seems like we have some red thread locker on the original bolts, so we're going to go ahead and duplicate that because we don't want to take any chances with brake parts coming loose. Torque spec is 63 pounds. I actually don't have a socket this big somehow. This is a 19 millimeter. Biggest thing I got is about like 18. So we're just gonna have to go old school and fill it out. Shit. Oh, make sure you put your rotor on first. Next up, get our caliper on. You see here we got some blue thread locker, so let's go ahead and give this a little blue. Come on. So according to the manual, the correct torque on this is 24 foot-pounds. And you need to put in your brake shoes before you do this. Dang, I'm like forgetting everything today. So the factory pads had these little clips right here. They need to go under the caliper. It's probably like an anti-rattle thing. Don't forget your pads, like I just did. All the bolts torqued into factory spec 37 foot-pounds. The only thing left is to put the tire on. That's 100 foot-pounds for the lug nuts. So if this has helped you out, go ahead and give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we'll see you around for more vlogs. Thanks for watching.